Alright, welcome back. This is Talking to Myself Gaming, and I am talking to myself. And today, I'm recording this in the daylight, which is unusual for my process. Usually I record as day is breaking, early in the AM. But today I decided to record earlier, in fact, rather than waiting until the night had passed and the dawn was coming, but instead to sit down shortly after waking up, because today is I don't know how to do this. Today's a difficult day for me. I hope that you're having a good day. I don't want to bring you down. But yeah, today's a difficult day for me. I realize, as I was thinking about today and how I should move forward with what I'm feeling, and that I feel a lot of shame for the pain that I'm in, and I feel inclined to hide that pain. And so I'm supposed to build sympathy for myself as a personality, even if I don't want to make a cult around myself. I am supposed to build with feeling. We've discussed compassion and the pathies. So I am supposed to articulate to you reasons that you should feel connected with me. Beyond that, I say things that might be right. And I was listening to one of the Greens, Hank, maybe, I don't know. And I don't know if he's been doing it, but I noticed that in the last few days he's done videos like what I do, actually entirely the same as what I'm doing, except he puts his face in it and he edits the thought down to 20 minutes. But even within the 20-minute time frame, it took him about 6 minutes to change the topic to something else, to go from his conceptual abstraction to a metaphor of the conceptual abstraction. And I clicked out of it. But the reason that I clicked out of it is because I don't like looking at his stupid face. And I kept thinking to myself that I am have already posted better versions and in a longer format that allow at least the meanderings of the metaphors as we try to ascend and descend the various planes or plateau of abstraction. I find my work more interesting, and so I didn't have any reason to listen to his anymore, because we're peers now. He's no longer a master and an authority and someone that I can learn from. He is now a peer and someone that if I engage with too much, I run the risk of imitating in my quest to learn from him. So rather than do what I usually do, and I've discussed this, which is destroy my heroes, what I need to do instead of conceptually destroying my heroes is I need to understand what level of abstraction I exist at, and what level of abstraction people who are like me or whom I would like to be like are at. This is a Mountain Dew, not a beer. I don't drink alcohol. So about 5 years ago, I suffered a pretty serious pelvic injury. I tore my pelvic floor muscles. As a boy, what that means is that I have things hanging between my legs in ways that they're not supposed to. It's very uncomfortable. It hurts a great deal. A few months before that, I shattered my patella and probably tore the tendons on both sides of my knee in the same way. On my bicycle, I used to commuter bicycle and I loved it, but in about, I don't know, maybe a few month time frame span, maybe 3 months span, I got overconfident and pushed myself too hard and gave myself saddle sores, and then, I don't know how you want to say it, wrecked my bike in the rain and tore my pelvis and my knee. Slammed my knee into the ground at 15 miles per hour. But I didn't not seek medical attention, especially for my pelvis. I had medical insurance because I think I've made this clear. I was a manager of a gas station. I was doing fairly well. I had a house and a girlfriend. I was divorced by that point, so I had spending money and credit card debt, and I did seek medical attention, and the doctors that I was appointed didn't pursue helping me in any kind of way. The first doctor that I saw, I went to a general practitioner the way you're supposed to, went and tried to get a doctor for me, and she was so uncomfortable with the idea of inspecting my perineum or my undercarriage that she wanted to try to tell me that all of my symptoms were of an STD. I didn't have an STD. I didn't have Hep C. If I had those particular bacteria or whatever that can be indicative of whichever hepatitis, because that's what she was trying to indicate to me, it's because my guts were in the same place that my urine goes. It's because I did have bacteria down there that wasn't supposed to be there. But whatever. She sent me to a urologist, and I got lost on the way to the urologist, and the urologist office told me to get fucked. And the damage that I did to myself trying to get to the urologist was so severe that I could no longer ride my bike to get anywhere. And meanwhile, my job wouldn't believe me even with my doctor's note that I could no longer lift 20 pounds. And so I was the only fully adult male that I worked with, and so I was the only person who was required by the corporation, by the policies of the corporation, of the manager and of the district manager and of the tradition of the company. I was the only human being responsible for lifting anything in the store at all. And I've never been able to drive. And the woman that I thought was the most important thing in my life refused to help in any kind of way. And so I've never thought of myself before today as a proud person. I've always thought of myself as humble. But I have been too proud to admit that I am hurt. I am injured. I am in a lot of pain. And so anyway, I walked to and from work 1/2 mile or more every day. Sometimes several miles a day. Because when I was finally able to get a car, I was never able to actually get my license because getting the money together, because of the expenses of the car itself, I was never able to actually get the money together to take the test. And so I got arrested for driving without my license and had to go back to walking, and then it got worse. and worse and worse. And now, because I've decided that I wanted to chase being an artist and being a shaman and the dreams of my youth, I no longer have any sort of identification, and I don't know that I could seek medical attention for it, but I do know that the pain has begun to prevent me from being able to sleep the night through. It's incredible. And I've been dealing with it. You know, I mean, you hear everyone say this. Every celebrity that gets sober, right? They self-medicate in some way, and so I began the pain medication. Not pain medication. I don't do opiates. That's not what I'm trying to say. I began to use weed as pain medication because it has efficacy. It works. And I will continue to use pain medication forever just because this is the song that never ends. So I didn't start this the way I had planned to. The way I had planned to start this is that mental health is a struggle every day, and some days are better than others. And it's not really a fight, it's just a fact. You're going to wake up feeling today, and you're going to wake up feeling tomorrow, and you're going to keep on waking up until you don't wake up anymore. And to make the choice to not wake up anymore is abhorrent to us all, even to those of us who have made it. Maybe especially to those of us who have made it and survived. Because we understand that what we were doing wasn't what we said, what we thought, or what we intended to do when we made the choice that we made. But I feel despair today. I didn't sleep all the night through because of my pain, and I was woken up. And then I couldn't fall back to sleep because of my pain. Which means that in a lot of ways, in my pride and in my arrogance, wanted to be or wanted to try or wanted to feel sobriety, since I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to stand up in front of you and say that I am an intellective person, and it's hard to believe that someone who is as intoxicated as I am can be an intellective person. We don't want to believe it. We want the data to speak for itself, and for high people who use marijuana, to also be deeply lazy people. And in a lot of ways I am a deeply lazy person. I get tired very, very shortly because I can't walk anymore. My body has begun to twist. I can feel my spine and the musculature of my torso twisting to embrace holding my guts and my pelvis. And I deny it to myself because I'm proud. And I say, no, you can fight through it. You've felt worse. But it just gets worse every day. And I don't know I don't know, for all that I talk about and I extol the virtue, maybe, of magic, I don't know that I am a believer. I don't know that I make that clear in my work, and Gowan wants to be on mic with me. I'm sorry for the clicking. That's my buddy, Gowan. He's just woke up, and it's hot in here. It's very hot in here lately. Everybody says that. I want to say for the record, I've actually been sneering every time everybody complains about it being hot, and I've just assumed they're all exaggerating, because in southern Ohio it's actually been fairly cold, fairly balmy and cool, but the last 2 days have indeed been hot, so cheers. Welcome to the rest of the world. Despair, like the most minor disappointment, is an emotion which I am not emotionally handled or equipped to handle. That's what I meant to say. That I am emotionally equipped to handle. I don't know what to do about it. Usually my move, when I am overwhelmed by despair, because I have had in the last, at 36 now, I entered preschool sometime around 4 years old, so sometime between, so that's between 4 years and 34 years, so 30 years. That's 30 years of having an 8 to 12 hour job or hour outlet that I'm required to be at 5 days a week. But if you've been listening to these, you know that I used to skip school. I used to skip school as early as kindergarten, just not go. I was a latchkey kid. If you don't know, my parents both worked for the first several years of my childhood, and so I would walk to school and walk home from school, so some days I just didn't go to school at all. I just decided to stay home and watch daytime television, Ricky Lake or whatever was on. I remember those days better than I remember school. But when I felt despair in the last 30 years, obviously, after I graduated high school, despair is a large part of why I dropped out of university, but I couldn't just not go to work when I was despairing. So I just learned to compartmentalize the despair and just turn it off in my mind and put it out of my thoughts while I was at work, and then to just keep it out of my thoughts while I was at home. And so I know now, sitting here with my ruined genitals and my shattered knee, and I know that is why my marriage failed, and I know that is why she left. It was the despair that they didn't know that I felt it, because I didn't know that I felt it anymore. It had been so long, I thought that it was gone. But it was just, it's like depression is not in a joking way like the Hulk, with the rage. Well, how are you able to turn into the Hulk at will? It's like, well, I'm always angry. Well, it's like depression and despair. It's like, how can a any sad song at any given moment in any place make you cry? It's like, well, because I'm always despairing. Because I'm always hurting. I'm always in agony and always reminded of the agony now. And so, if I believe anything, if I have any kind of worldview, it's been this worldview that pain is trying to teach us a lesson. That pain is a reminder not to do the thing. And then it's like, but I'm in so much pain all the time. How can I be hyper vigilant about these things that... But that's what anxiety is. And so what I've done is I've psychosomatically created and manifested my anxiety into my pelvis and into my knee. And I've, instead of now my outlets for my anxiety being my affection for the woman that I love, or walking, just being ambulatory, which in a lot of ways what that is hiding in a cave or running, escaping. And so if you're the woman I love, that just appears, I just appear to be hiding in you, and I don't appear to be meaningfully with you. I just, from their perspective, I just look like any drug user, but they were the drug. I didn't know that, and of course, because I wasn't communicating that I was in despair, I also wasn't receiving communications that I wasn't being communicative, or that I wasn't being fair. But my worldview doesn't account for the after. I talk a lot about 12 steps, and I talk a lot about, well, what's the 13th step? You can always tell a cult, or you can always tell whether a worldview is efficacious by whether the worldview has an after the worldview, has an after step, a 13th step, to be metaphorical. And my worldview that pain teaches a lesson and that pain is a reminder, it doesn't have a 13th step. It doesn't have a result. If you understand that, what I mean is it doesn't account for what if the injury won't heal? Or what if after the injury has healed, like my knee, the pain never stops? And what does it mean when it hurts when it's cold, or when it hurts when it's damp outside? Or what does it mean when it hurts when you first wake up? It doesn't have to mean anything other than that it hurts. And trying to claim that it means something else is a pride. It's a denial. It's a denial of the pain. It's a denial of the reality of the pain, and it's a denial of the despair. But I deny the despair because of the shame. I deny the despair because no one really wants to hear about your despair. No one wants to be reminded why they should be. Nobody wants to be reminded of what they are despairing, and because so many people make the first mistake of being a human and having these big comparing brains, they compare themselves to other people. And so people are going to want to compete with me. And they're going to want to say, well, I hurt worse. I have worse hurt. And it's like, maybe. But it's also like, the more I sit with these thoughts and the more I engage with what I feel, and the more I try to inhabit this body, and I realize and realize I don't just mean have the thought. I mean, have the thought and then pursue the thought until it becomes a real and permanent part of my expression. Real eyes as a verb. I realize that I'm probably dying. I'm probably not long. And even if I am long, I'm not long for the able-bodied world. I'm never going to run. I'm never going to perform a triathlon. And I'm never going to be the athlete, the rollerblade X Games hero that I wanted to be when I was a little boy. That there are some dreams, like my elementary school teachers taught me, that just are unattainable. And it's not just that they're unattainable, it's that they were unrealistic to begin with. And that fills me with despair because I'm proud. And I wanted to be an athlete. And I wanted to I didn't want to win. I didn't want to be good. I didn't want to be special. I wanted to say I had done it. I wanted to say that I had fought and I had done it. And I never will. And if I don't get this fixed soon, there are a lot of dreams that I will never realize. If I get myself wheelchair bound by not taking care of this before it's irreparable and I lose the loss of one or both of my legs, or I lose the loss of my urinating member because of this, I will never hike the Alps, and I will never see the Apennine Way. So, that fills me with despair. And because I am not emotionally mature enough to be pre-equipped to handle despair, the desperation, that's what the word means. To be desperate means to be despairing. I want to freeze, and I want to just lie down and cry until the worst of it is past. But when I do that, because I have done it a lot in the last 2 years, when I do that, there's always a moment where I realize that I don't have a choice but to get up. That the only other choice is to maliciously be non-compliant with the basic credo of biology, of life, to survive at all costs, no matter what, no matter how bad it hurts. And so you have to get up. And so everybody talks in this hyper optimistic language, like, you can do it, and it's okay, and it's okay to be sad sometimes, and it's okay to not be okay, but nobody ever tells you what to do after. They just tell you it's okay that you're despairing, but I don't want to share that. And it's like, but that's not compassion for my hurt. It's just a polite way of telling me to keep it to myself. But it's despair. And if you keep it to yourself, the only person there is to share it with is God. And what happens when you don't believe that even if God is listening, it can help? What if you don't believe it wants to help you? What if all this talk about free will and determinism and not believing that we don't have choices? What if my insistence that we have choices, that we make choices, what if my insistence on that is pride, is just basal pride, and we don't make choices? There is no choice. There is only what we are conditioned to. We are only. As a young man, as a boy, when I was a teenager, whatever way you want to say that, because I matured in a lot of ways much more rapidly than my peers, and obviously in a lot of ways much less rapidly than my peers. I used to say in middle school and high school that I am not, and I refuse to be, a product of my environment, the sum of what I have lived through alone. The sum of where I've been alone is what I used to say. I used to say, I refuse to be the sum of where I've been alone. That I would steer. And where I have steered myself is into a desperate place. But that's the hero's journey. There's no comfort in that. There's no comfort in knowing that in my arrogance and in my refusal to just exist in the way that everybody else has existed for ever. It's not even like it was a refusal. Like, I mean, I wasn't being proud on purpose, is the thing. It's not like it was conscious. I made the choice, but it's not like, now looking back, it's not like I feel like I had any other choice. Because maybe I'm autistic, and maybe what it is maybe all this talk about ritual clothing, maybe what I'm talking about is behavior masking, or whatever they call it. Maybe it's just masking. And so for me, whether I choose to be authentic to myself or I choose to be more like you, it's all a pretense for me. To me, it's all an act. In order for me to express myself outside of my body at all, for me to speak, for me to express my face, for me to do body language, for me to write, for me to anything, it's a choice. It would be just as satisfying, which is another word that doesn't mean what we know what it means intuitively, but we don't know what it means intellectually anymore. I don't want to get into it. Maybe I do another episode about satisfaction. I mean, I've got a fucking hour and a half. That filled me with despair. Because I'm determined to be able to do this for 2 hours, and to do this for 2 hours. I am determined to push through the hard part and to come out of it with something to learn and something to have taught and something positive. Even despair. And so I've lost the thread. I've lost multiple threads, but the last thread that I remember, and the one that actually moves forward and isn't just spooling string because I've got string to spool, is that I said that I don't know what to do with the despair when I feel it. But what I used to do is work through it. I used to just go to work, because work was what I had to do anyway. And so what I did is I sat down and pressed record. Because this is the closest thing that I have to work for work's sake. And I have suggested that I need to talk about this, and I am not convinced that I am not going to develop, if I haven't already developed, symptoms of post-concussion syndrome. I have suffered a lot of concussions in my youth, probably no few in my adulthood. I've put my brain through a lot of trauma. I've experienced a lot of violence and a lot of abuse, a lot of hurt, a lot of mistreatment. And so I am not convinced that I any longer have decades to perfect my art and my philosophy and my worldview before I express it. I am increasingly unafraid of being wrong, because I have recorded myself saying a lot of wrong things. And it's liberating to be wrong in a lot of ways, because saying something that's deliberately wrong, it's truthful but deliberately wrong in such a way that you're encouraging your audience to tell you how you're wrong so that you can have the deeper conversation about how you're right and what it means that you're wrong, and the truth, what it means, the division between saying something truthful and speaking the truth. That's an interesting conversation to have, but that's not the conversation that I'm going to have yet. I don't know what conversation I'm going to have moving forward. Now that the despair is beginning to pass, I no longer feel as intensely like I need to do this or like I have anything particular to say, so I'm just going to hold your earballs for another hour and 20 because I want to, and I want to be self-indulgent. To say that I've never been self-indulgent is incorrect. That's how I hurt myself. That's how I got my injuries, was overindulging in my appreciation for the women that I loved, and overindulging in my pride in my physical prowess. Which both of those things are true. Both of those things are categorically true of both injuries, conceptually, and both things. I wanted my women to be proud that their man was so athletic, and then, I wanted them to be proud that their man adored them so much. But that's the way that I did it was wrong. They were not proud of. They were ashamed and embarrassed of me. And so in a lot of ways, I suppose that's when strangers view what I've made in a lot of ways, because of how I've set myself up. I've set myself up in opposition to liberals as such. And because the liberal worldview, I say this every time, but because the liberal worldview wins the discussion when it comes to I wish I could remember the argument, but the liberal worldview gets absorbed into the public consciousness, even though they can't seem to sustainably win elections, because they speak semantically true statements that aren't actually truths. And so their worldview is everyone's worldview. Because everyone agrees that their words are right, so their language is the language that we all share. And so because we share their language, we share their worldview. We may not agree with it, but conversation begins at the liberal worldview's opinions of things and whether you reject it or accept them. And then most conversation ends at trying to pull on the strings to understand how the fabric of the liberal worldview that we all share is made. Because if we all share it, then if we pull it apart to see how it's made, we won't have it anymore. If we if we make a new fabric, we've made a new fabric. Even if we've made it with the... We understand intuitively that, like I discussed with the Alexander's sword, the Alexander's sword analogy or allegory, right? If you replace all of the pieces of the sword, is it the same sword? Well, if you put it on the pedestal with the name the same of Alexander's sword, yes. But if you replace all the pieces and then you put it on a pedestal with a different name, no. So if we collectively, because we share this fabric, this bolt of fabric that hasn't been made into anything, if you understand textile metaphors, and if you don't, I encourage you to take a pair of socks. I used to do this, and it would make my stepmother absolutely fucking insane. That's part of why I did it. I used to wear tube socks because I liked them, and what I would do is I would pull them all the way up to my knee while I was playing Total War. At the time, it was either Medieval 2 or Rome the First, and I would take the tube sock and I would pull on the threads, the elastic threads that make up the top row around of the weave of the sock. I would pull at them until I could get one to break, and then I would just slowly pull all of the threads one at a time. That, I don't know what you would call it, but either the woofed or the weft or the whatever, the horizontal threads that go around the long thread that make up the body of the sock, I would just pull those out one at a time. Over the course of hours, and then the sock would slowly dissolve around my leg, and I just found that I found it enjoyable as a sensation to do, and it was something to do over and over and over and over and over with my hands, while I ignored the despair that wasn't picking at scabs or chewing on my lips or whatever of those overstimulation things that, you know, we sufferers from chronic pain do. My pain is lessening. I wonder whether it's that I've found myself in a comfortable position. I've lowered my blood pressure enough with weed. I've desensitized the actual wound with weed, or my actual psychological stress has decreased enough that the wound isn't psychosomatically bulging. I don't know. But this is the first minute, 60 seconds that I've gone in 2 days that I haven't been in just searing hot pain. Like a burning coal has been dropped in my lap. And the relief, realizing that I wasn't in pain has caused me to completely forgot everything that I was thinking about. Forgot. That's right. I don't even remember how to do words anymore. I can't language do it right. Language can't make words do good right. The liberal worldview is, I've said it, it's Christianity. But the liberal worldview is a confusion of syntactically true, or how did I say it? Not syntactically true, but semantically true. Also syntactically true. But a syntactically true statement, a statement that reads true because the grammar is correct, is kind of like an auto spell, like a spell check correct sentence. Like it might be syntactically true, but that doesn't mean that you use the correct form of there, right? You understand what I'm saying? So semantically true is a sentence that isn't falsifiable by the words in it, either the way that it's said or by an abstract argument of the formation of the words, and that's different than syntax. Semantics is different than syntax. If they were the same thing, they'd have the same name. I don't remember why I was talking about. I don't remember why I made that distinction. Oh, they are a confusion of... Liberalism is a confusion of semantically true statement. I hate it that my body does this. I fucking hate it so much. I need a cough button or something. Every time I say something like that that's difficult for me, I cough or I burp or I fart or I make some horrible noise. It's awful. It feels awful to inhabit it. My body's seizing up and going into panic mode because I'm saying something that I imagine some one person out there is going to say something mean to me for. So, again, now that my body is calm, liberalism is a confusion of semantically true statements, of true isms that aren't themselves truth. Included in that is Zoroastrian dualism, because, let's see, the liberal worldview is kind of like science fiction and fantasy, in that the same people that wrote and liked to read same in the previous 2 centuries are the same people that voted liberal. But also, they're like those things in that they incorporate everything that they think is cool, and because they're educated as sophists, that is, they're educated to say whatever they need to say to win an argument, they introduce the things that they think are cool to their worldview in a way that is semantically true and therefore easy for everyone else in the worldview and outside it to agree with and adopt, whether they incorporate it and practice it or not. And so again, one of those confusions that they've added to liberalism that what's the word that I want to say? Disqualifies it isn't what I mean, but it makes it dissonance. It dissonates the liberal worldview is the notion of dualism, that everything has its equal and opposite, right? That every action has its equal and opposite reaction, but also that everything has its equal and opposite thing, right? And so I'm sure that by now I'm not the only person who has seen these images of quantum linked or quantum entangled particles and notes. I can't be the only person who's noted that they look like the yin-yang symbol, but of course they look like the yin-yang symbol. First of all, the image was absolutely manipulated in such a way that it would look like the yin-yang symbol, but also, of course, it would actually look like the yin-yang symbol. But we went over that in the first episode. We might have gone over it in magic as well. So that's not really what I'm talking about. What am I talking about? Well, I said that liberalism has incorporated Zoroastrian dualism, and Zoroastrian dualism is a worldview or a categorical philosophy, because Zoroastrianism, one thing that we need to understand is that categories didn't exist before Aristotle. That like specific categories of being did not exist until Aristotle. So before Aristotle, and so what that means is before Alexander's Greece, before Aristotle, what you had was loose groupings by loose categorical descriptions. And so a lot of schools are broken up into 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and whatever, water. Some are broken up into 6, where they include like other whatever. I'm not talking about that, because we're not talking about category of being. That's not what this is. This podcast is about, in a lot of ways, me trying to work my way through this despair that I feel behind my eyes still. But in the Zoroastrian system, there are only 2 categories of being. There are good things and there are bad things. So there are things that are good in the sense of serving the biological function of living for the sake of living, and there are things which are bad, which serve the function of chaos and specifically entropy, because chaos is entropy. But we don't understand chaos as entropy, because we don't understand entropy. We don't understand chaos, and we don't understand entropy. We think of chaos as being as being random pockets of activity, or clusters of disorder, right? Because we think in Zoroastrian terms, we think in dualistic terms that this is what I'm saying. The liberal worldview, the categorical worldview that we have, is a dualistic worldview of opposites. That everything has its opposite, right? And so what we have is we have an oppositional identification. So the way that we do our definitions, the way that we define words, the way that we define abstract ideas, the way that we concretize, the way that we build up our universe. Oh, there's something that I forgot to say. I should have said fucking 45 minutes ago. But if you're going to take anything out of this, you're supposed to take that I'm giving you something that you can't find anywhere else. You can definitely not find the information that I'm giving to you, presented to you in the way that I'm presenting it, anywhere else. No one will say the things that I am willing to say in this podcast anywhere else. And not a lot of the things that I'm saying, no one will say them in a loving way. That's what I've been trying to say, is that I set myself up and I have obviously set myself up in opposition to the liberal worldview, but the world, things aren't concretized by their opposites. In fact, we do that. We concretize the universe in opposition, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? We realize everything in its opposite. And so when I was talking about negative attribution or identification through negative attribution, identification through negation, we don't do that. We don't say, well, this is not that, this is not that, this is not that. We say, this is its opposite, right? We identify things through their opposites, but that's not what things are. So because I have obviously set myself up in opposition to the liberals for click reasons, right? The best way to get liberals to click anything is either to say what they agree with or to tell them that they're dumb, call them stupid. They'll click for that, because they want to take you out of context and misquote you in their cognitive superiority complex. And see, now that I've said the thing that was important to me to have said, I've wandered off track and started playing on my toes like a baby. But I'm not a conservative. I'm not the opposite of a liberal. Because even though I've set myself up in my play acting and the way that I've represented myself in opposition to liberalism, I also oppose conservatism. Conservatism. You're a conservative if you ascribe to conservatism. That's strange to me. That's still a mouthful. I don't like that. Conservation. You're a conservative if you ascribe to conservation of the old ways. Every time. But I'm not a conservative. Because as much as I respect the old ways, the conservative worldview, how do I want to say this? This is hard to say. The conservative worldview is a deliberate misinterpretation of the past to maintain the status quo of the present. So the conservatives are why we are where we are with the liberals. Because it was more important to them to remain in office than to govern. And so I wonder if that's why I think so much and why I talk so much during extreme individualism about the role of the parent to the child, because the government's role to the constituent is parent to child, but the child doesn't get to elect their parent. So representative government might be impossible on its face. it's a good idea to elect your representative. It's a good idea to elect your officials, but when you have a liberal, I went, okay, I have a lot of pre-verbal thoughts all trying to happen at once. So work with me here. I recently went through and revisited my title, the convention that I used for my titles. I changed the titles on the Talking to Myself podcast series. And so in doing that, I was revisiting the content of them to get a refresher on what exactly I was talking about and not to what degree I stuck to the topic, because I'm hit or miss on that, but I'm very proud of what I've said so far. And I realized that the title that I gave Illiberal, the original title, and what will remain on the thumbnail, so even if you haven't listened to that episode, it will be very clear to you which one I'm talking about when you find it. That illiberal was the title that I chose because illiberal is a word that didn't mean anything to me. It's a word that is defined in opposition to liberal, but liberal means something different in the language than what the ideologue or what do you call that when it's a capital letter? The ideal, what am I trying to say? The ideology. Wow. Why couldn't I think of that word? Okay. The word liberal in the language, and I don't even mean the common tongue. I just mean like the way everyone uses the word. The way that the word liberal is used in the language when it's oh my goodness. Why does my body do this? The anxiety to say these things. Liberal in the language with a lowercase letter doesn't mean the same thing as liberal, the ideology. Those words mean different things, right? So when you say be liberal when you say to a server be liberal in your pour of that bottle of wine, you're not telling them to be progressive about it, right? You're telling them to be a little freer in their expression maybe than tradition or propriety dictate, right? That's what liberal means. So to be illiberal means to be unfree, right? But in the language, to be illiberal would mean not to be conservative. It wouldn't mean to be reserved. To be illiberal would mean to be proper, to behave properly to the situation. I guess that's why I get fucked up on it so bad. And now I'm just real fucked up on this whole topic. I don't even know. I've never thought about it like that. Even in thinking about it as intensely as I was trying it and have since. That's what I was saying as I was looking back at those old titles, and I realized I left a lot there, and illiberal doesn't mean anything. So if in fact an oppositional worldview could work, if you could define things and in fact define yourself in opposition to things, then words would be intuitive and they would be used in opposition or in their opposites. So like illiberal would make sense, but illiberal is not what you say. You don't say, hey, be illiberal in your pouring with the wine with the customers. That's not what you would say. You would say, hey, maybe be less liberal, or hey, maybe let's stick to propriety. Like let's do this the proper way. so in that way, if I've proved that you can't define things through opposition, that you have, like, the reason that we use categories, that we don't use a dualistic system, even Christianity doesn't use a dualistic system, and has never, Christianity has never, in an orthodox school, no orthodox school of Christianity has ever been able to maintain a dualistic system, because dualism breaks down in a post-category philosophy, like tradition, like, and if you are a dualist and you're talking to a person who's educated in categories, you always lose the debate unless you fall back to sophisticated tricks. And sophisticated tricks are how liberalism is able to say things that are semantically true but which have no truth. Like, now liberals are coming after homeschool, which is amazing, because liberals are the first people to defend the First Amendment until you want to use the First Amendment to tell liberals that they can't tell your children how they have to behave and how they have to speak. But see, that makes me sound like a conservative whack job. But the thing is, I don't like conservatives anymore, because conservatives are going to also tell you how you have to speak. Because it's not the liberals who want to put your kids in uniforms at school, it's the conservatives. But the thing is, I would have no problem with most, like a great deal, 98% of the ideas that the conservatives and even the libertarians have, as much as I just roundly don't like libertarian individuals that I have known. I would agree with their policies and their ideas and the hills on which they die if they had good reasons, if they knew their reasons, if they interpreted their texts correctly. But because they have a priestly tradition, their tradition is that of the Jewish high priest standing among the congregation and telling them how they're going to behave. Thus is the will of God, thus spake the Constitution. Because they don't interpret their text correctly or at all. They frequently just say the words with no understanding or no attempt at interpretation. They want to go with a literalism. Because they have such bad arguments. Their bad arguments indicate that they have bad understanding, and because they have bad or poor or no understanding, I can't agree with them. Because if you agree with them without understanding what they're saying and without qualifying that you're not agreeing with them, you've come to the same conclusions that they've come to independently, but you have good reasons, you're just Andrew Tate. You're just another conservative asshole who's grandstanding against prostitutes. And it's like, how like, can you punch any lower than a prostitute? You really can't. And it's not. That's something that I think is going to turn people off to this, is how frequently I mention prostitution, because that sounds sexist, but I feel like I've talked about this to the point that I would be satisfied with my opinions on this. Prostitution no longer means the selling of one's body. It just means the selling, it no longer means the selling of one's body for psychosexual favors. Now it literally just means the selling of one's work, of one's labor. So that, like, the only way one can't be a prostitute is to do what I'm doing, is to go into independent production. Which is how, the men and women and everything in between and everything outside of that Venn diagram that's on OnlyFans. That's why they're confused. That's why they're confused about how society is reacting to them. They're like, "Well, I'm not doing anything anybody else isn't doing," and it's like, yeah, but you're doing things that we agreed 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200,000 years ago aren't how you ascend the social hierarchy. The men and women who ascend the social hierarchy between the legs of an important person, they're not actually respected. Theodora was never respected in her life. Eleanor of Aquitaine was never respected in her life. She was always considered immoral and unethical because of her young adulthood psychosexual drama. Whether the things that were said about her are true or not, and frankly, I admire and think Eleanor of Aquitaine is one of history's true heroes. Fuck gender suffixes. She's a hero. She's one of my heroes. And she went to her grave. She went to her grave denigrated because she used her childbearing gifts for political gain. Because no matter who you are and no matter how you use the gain, we agree that the prostitution, the thing that we can all do for ourselves, for someone else, for free, the thing that we can all volunteer because we want to volunteer it, that first goodness about which I spoke in the first episode, the first goodness is the freedom to volunteer your goodness, your kindness, your time, that the physical presence of your body, right? What you want, if you're listening to this, is you want the freedom to be able to sit and listen to this without interruption, to be able to focus on it and think along with me and to disagree. What you want is the freedom to volunteer your disagreement. I just love how much Gowan wants to be on mic. I do, actually. It's probably annoying to you, but I've actually grown. I used to hate that sound. The sound of the little ball in their drippy water thing clicking. It used to drive me crazy. And I've grown to love it because it means that they're alive. It means that they're satisfying the basic biological function that all living things are driven to satisfy. And that means that in whatever way I'm at least not letting him down in that regard. So it's come to comfort me. But I have forgotten what I'm saying. You know, I've talked a lot about paths, and there's, hey Cutter, you want to be on mic too, buddy? And they just stare at me the whole time. They just look at me the whole time, because they know that I don't love that noise. I'm feeling better. It's easier to smile when my animals are relaxed. They've eaten, and they're hydrated. It's easier to feel like I've accomplished something when they're okay. Like, and so that's what if I'm going to circle all the way back to sympathy and learning lessons, what you should learn from my failures is it's not to not love your wife, and it's not to not hold the people that you care about, and to hold them tight, and to tell them all the time, you matter to me, you're important to me. Those things aren't what I'm saying were mistakes. What I'm saying is they didn't know that I worked to chase the despair away by making sure that they were comfortable and happy. They just saw it as, I don't know what women call it, being put on a pedestal, right? So in a lot of ways, I'm sure that they saw even my routine attentions, like making sure that there's a date night and we're going to see movies and that we're together, and I'm sure that they saw that as required, right? As work, as showing up to work because I'm on the schedule. It never was, but because they didn't know about the black, they didn't know about the despair, they didn't know about the hurt and the childhood trauma, and they could never understand why my memory is the way it is because they didn't know about the concussions. Because I in my pride and in my shame from the two people that mattered the very most to me, I hid who I was so that I don't know. I don't know what more the takeaway is other than I hid who I was. Because I didn't speak except to bitch about work or to hyper fixate on whatever thing I was hyper fixated on, because I was masking being a nerdy guy from a sitcom because I thought that is what they would like. Because I wasn't worried about being loved and being adored and being admired and being held in return. I didn't know yet that those things mattered. Because what do 20-somethings know about anything? Nothing. That's why 20-something men weren't allowed to marry, except for those whose only responsibility was to produce children. Well, then they got married early so that their responsibilities could be out of the way, and then they could disappear and spend their family's money and hopefully make a little bit. And by make a little bit, usually it was the wife who was responsible, in fact, for making a little bit, not the husband. That changed, but that changed because of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Because Eleanor of Aquitaine brought hypergamy to Europe. And if you don't know what hypergamy is why Indian women are so upset on the internet. Hypergamy, hyper, is a word that I don't know how to break down and describe, but gamy is usually used to describe women, wives. So it's like hyper wives, basically. Because polygamy means multiple wives. Polygyny or polygyny or polygyny means multiple husbands. So anyway, gamy probably means probably has to do with the husband. So hypergamy probably means hyper husband or something like that, because we all know that Gyn, guinea, has to do with the gynecologist. So hypergamy is where women will only marry and reproduce with the most successful male suitors. So sort of what you're seeing with Jasmine and Disney's Aladdin. But Jasmine is holding out for a hypergamy of love rather than a hypergamy of status, right? Because she's a romance. She's a Western romance. The holding out for love thing, that I don't know how much that actually features in non-Western stories, especially non-Western courtly romances. I'm sure that well, I'm thinking about Rachel and is it Jacob that falls in love with Rachel but has to marry her sister, and then Rachel, who loves Jacob, can't get pregnant by him. I think I think it's Jacob. Why did I start talking about hypergamy? Oh, well, I was going to say that I think that in fact, courtly poems about love and about romance aren't about hypergamy. They might always have been about the hypergamy of love, but socially, women are taught. Okay, I guess that makes sense. The reason that in fiction and especially narrative romantic fiction aimed at a female audience, the reason that the female characters are holding out for a hypergamy of love rather than a hypergamy of status is because the moral of the story in whatever way is that if you marry for status alone, your partner is going to be a bad match. You're not going to like one another, and you're not going to have successful progeny. And so, romantic literature comes from a tradition of religious literature that's kind of false, but also not so much false. You can just look at Arthur and all of the named characters in the Arthur romances are actually gods from the previous generations that had fallen out of not out of favor, but out of use. And so they use the romances of the gods to show, like, well, mortals might not be able to marry for love, but when these gods married for love, and what that means is when these people in the deep past married for love, this is what we know went wrong. And so that's why I'm saying, like, that conservatives and tradition-based thinking, conservatism, I did it again, conservatism, I hate that word, conservatism. The reason that I reject conservatism is because it makes up the people of the past. It just invents the people of the past. So, like, even when we have a people of the past, like the Romans, current right-wing nut jobs, like the extreme conservative nut jobs right now, have just invented what Rome was like. Like, the neo-Nazi necessarily has to reinvent what Nazism is in order for it to continue. Like, in order to conserve the past, you have to reimagine what it was. You have to reinvent it. You have to represent it, right, as something other than what it was. Because, like, it's hard to say this, but the whole flat earth thing, like, just pointing to the flat earth thing, like pointing to rejectionism and pointing to that, right? Alternate history, alternate science, alternate theories of reality, right? Alternativism, right? I don't know. Just look at them. That's what I'm saying. Come to your own conclusions. It's there. I always forget what I'm saying as I go down the list of all the different ways I'm right. I forget the latter half of the argument. My mind is wandering. The despair is gone because the pain is waning. And usually what I do is I have to work myself up into an anger in order to feel like I have anything to say. And so now that the despair is gone, I no longer have that to speak, to push me. I don't feel like I have anything really to say, even though it's right there. It's all right there. It's right on the tip of my tongue. And so that's why I think about my friend who believes that communication is mathematics, but every time I try to get him to talk about it and to express what he means by that, he won't do it. So I don't think he believes it. I think he says it because you can say it and it's semantically or at least syntactically true, but I don't know that it's even semantically true, because the process of communication, even if you're trying to communicate numbers, if you're trying to communicate a mathematic idea, it starts in the left brain, but it goes to the right brain, which means it processes through the corpus callosum, which means that it's if it were in script language, it's being translated into another code, another language. It doesn't even need to be script language, just language. So it's being translated in abstract from Greek to Latin, and then it's going into their mind, and they don't speak either Greek or Latin. And so it has to be translated from whatever language you spoke it to them that you have in common, and then they translate it. They translate it first into whatever is the right side of their brain, and then to the left side, and then to communicate that they understood it, they have to translate it in reverse order again out their mouths into yours, and then it goes back into your. And this happens with everything the process of communication has to be so much slower than the way that we do it. And see, this is why this is why I reject conservatism, and it's why I reject liberalism, and it's why I reject dualism, is because when you speak with a liberal, they just assume you're a conservative. Just automatically assume that you're, if you disagree with them, that you're a conservative, because they have a dualistic worldview. And so they just make assumptions about you, and an assumption is a prejudice. And if you remember me talking in my compassion, we agreed in the 90s that you're not supposed to prejudice against people, but we called it discretion. You're not allowed to be discreet, right? And so you're not allowed to be subtle, right? And so you have to be shouting at all times. And so that's how conversation goes. It goes, I disagree with you. Well, I'm going to shout you down. Because we're not civilized anymore. I don't assume that my Let's Plays have any overlap, and you won't hear this for another week, maybe 2 weeks, anyway, if they do have overlap. But last night I was recording for Sea of Stars, and I was talking about the level of cultural discourse in our civilization, and how relatively low, not relatively low, extremely low, the cultural discourse in our civilization is. And I was talking about specifically how I tend to communicate ideas through song lyrics. I used to only be able to communicate my feelings and my ideas in song lyrics. I would and quotations, not my own original song lyrics. That would require interpretation. But other song lyrics that I thought were well known and that I felt were readily apparent on their surface. But I became aware of how communication gets lost in translation when nobody understood what I meant by song lyrics, that they knew the song. And then when I became, in my mind, a writer, I noticed that because our level of cultural discourse is so shallow, and because it's so easy now with the internet to pretend to belong places, and because of the anti-bullying campaigns of the 2000s, we no longer gatekeep. So you'll see, I'm thinking about, and I'm not trying to talk about, but I'm just going to have to talk about how now you see in nerd discourse, nerd culture, that, and I need to be leaning into it, and I am, in fact, in my Sea of Stars Let's Plays. So watch my Sea of Stars Let's Plays that are coming out. They're going to be every other day for a while now. And I might, if you watch and you comment and you like and you get your friends to subscribe, I'll do it every day, and then I'll ramp up. I could put out 3 videos a day if I really 3 2-hour videos a day if I had you watching. I don't even need the income. I just need a little bit of encouragement, is what I'm saying. The despair, I could work through the despair a lot easier, and the pain, and I can reconcile losing my legs and losing the athleticism that I never had, and giving up on my dreams if this one can start to come true a little bit. That's what I'm saying. And I want that. You know, I don't like the desperation. So what was I saying? Nerd discourse that you'll see a lot now on YouTube and Twitter. It's not called Twitter anymore, but I hate calling it X. I don't think people know what I mean. Like in my comments, I say you can follow me on X, but I haven't gotten a single follow. And it might be that I'm a crazy person. I would not recommend following me on Twitter. But if you like this stuff I'm talking about, I obsess over it on Twitter first, and then having said it on Twitter, I circle back around to it in these. Nerd discourse. You see a lot of nerd discourse now on how nerds used to be nerds, and they used to be insufferable as nerds, and they used to be all of the stereotypes and all of the tropes and all of the things that are nerdy. Like, nerds used to be nerdy because they were right? Like, the argument, like the whole making fun of nerds because they have these conversations like who would win in a fight between Batman and Spider-Man. Like, the reason that those conversations became stereotypical and that the is because they were happening, and the reason that they were happening at the, not the frequency, but the intensity that they were memorable to non-nerds is because those guys were passionate and they were right. They were informed enough to be right. And so it hasn't come out yet, but I talked a little bit about how a lot of what's wrong with American television, I just said the sentence, what's wrong with American television and what's wrong with American serial movies. So what's wrong with American serial storytelling is that the writers are writing it at the same pace that they're presenting it to their audience. And so I tried to do this, in fact. I keep trying to do this. I keep trying to find an alpha reader or to find any audience that will consume, read, listen to my narrative work, so I can start to react to their questions, so I can start to present it in a way that it feels living to them, right? But that's why Sea of Stars is so terrible, and this isn't a Sea of Stars review, but it is a gaming channel, and I am talking to myself, and I am feeling a little better, and my ideas are starting to come together naturally in a kind of holistic way. And so maybe this will give you a reason to go and visit my Sea of Stars. But the reason that Sea of Stars is so bad is that every level doesn't build on top of the next. Every stage, every event in the game doesn't build on top of the next. It's a reaction to the negative critique they got of the previous. So rather than going back and, okay, the best advice, I think, that I've heard when it comes to writing a novel, okay, or any piece of anything, is to write it, just write it, and then take what you've written and put it somewhere and don't read it. Just put it away. Like if you write in a Word document, I write by hand first. If you compose in a Word document, just save the Word document and open a new one and write it again. Just write it again. Don't reference with your eyeballs. Don't look at it. Use the same notes, but just tell the same story again. Take that, save it, put it away, do it again. And then the third one will be the draft that you can edit, because you'll know what you're trying to say well enough that you've already got it memorized now. So the third draft is the one that you can edit, and that way. And so what I'm saying is that when you write something to your audience as you're releasing it, so Community, for example, the reason that Community got canceled is because Community's writing schedule was so short, right? They wrote and dress rehearsed and recorded all of their episodes on the same day, same afternoon. It's very grueling to make the show Community, which is why Parks and Rec did the exact opposite thing, where they would come up with the themes and the overall arc that the season was going to take. The writers and the team that made Parks and Rec what Parks and Rec was, they would do that like almost like a football team with a summer camp. And then they would write the individual episodes as they were coming out. But they would know their themes and they would know their broad character arcs, and they would know how the show was going to develop over the course of the season before. And that's why George R.R. Martin didn't want anyone to make a television show of his work, because he needed it to be holistic. And that's why the writers of Game of Thrones will tell you The television show, the writers themselves, the two dickheads, will tell you themselves that they fucked up with the first two seasons by knowing the story too well and not telling it in a way that people who didn't know it would know what the fuck is going on. And I'll tell you right now, refusing to read the books after the one kid gets pushed out the window because I'm not into torture porn, I had no idea what the fuck was going on by episode 3 of season 2, and I said, fuck this. I don't need to impress anyone by watching this. And so that gets to what I'm talking about with culture and consumption and shared references. What I'm trying to say is that what I'm doing, this and my literary work, they're very difficult because we no longer have shared references. And by that, I mean me and you. Not me and generic audience, 10,000 million, 6.5 billion people in the world, that me and 6.5 billion or 7 or 8 or however many billions of people that we have in the world, that we don't have shared references. That's not what I mean. I mean you and I, the individual who is hearing this right now, if you're alone, and yeah, you and I, the individual that's hearing this. If you're in a room with other people, I'm talking to them, but I'm talking to you. We don't have shared references. And the reason that we don't have shared references is actually a good one. It's actually it's beneficial to us. We don't have shared references because we have such a wealth of things to refer to. We have such a wealth of creative outlets, if you understand by what I mean by that. We have such a wealth of places to look for culture, to look for wisdom, to look for identity, to look for society. But the problem becomes that we've all been conditioned to be fans, and fanatic consumption doesn't leave room for a broad, how would they say it? So a broad reading, let's say, a broad reading of the culture. And so in the pre-modern period, up to maybe the 1980s, I've talked about this a lot in other places, but this will be the first place, in fact, that you will have access. This will be the first time that you will have access to hear it. The idea wasn't necessarily to read a lot of words. The idea was to read a lot of different books. So the idea wasn't necessarily to have read a lot of books in one genre, right? So like, sure, you read 60 books this year, but they were all romantic thrillers, right? That's not being well read. That's having read a lot of romantic thrillers. Being well read is to have read maybe fewer books, but in a more diverse selection of them, right? So not one genre, and definitely not even only fiction. Like, in fact, until about the 80s, if you read nonfiction primarily, you weren't considered a reader. You weren't considered a literate person. And so when I talk about the gatekeeping, or the way that we stopped gatekeeping, and I will I've talked about this in real time, but this will be the first time it's on the podcast. The first thing when we attacked gatekeeping and we said no, gatekeeping is bad, the first thing that we attacked was the idea of being well read, well versed. To be well versed means to know a lot of poetry, right? We attacked that idea that in order to be civilized, in order to be cultured, in order to be a citizen of the world, you had to have things including almost polyglotism, the ability to function in multiple languages, but to be well read, to be well versed, to have a diverse understanding not only of your culture and the artistic milieu of your culture, but also the scientific understanding and the religious practice of your time. That is what it means to be civilized. And we, human beings, We city dwellers, we Americans are just not civilized anymore. We're just not. We're just not civilized anymore. We insist on being allowed to have pre-modern, even pre-medieval worldviews and behaviorisms. And see, there's this First Amendment expressional, representational, self-expression, self-representation right that we feel entitled to. And it brings me back to gnawing on the bone of extreme individualism. Like people that eat raw meat, right? People that aren't civilized enough even to satisfy the basic needs of life, the basic needs of survival. Me. Like at what point do I lose the right to care for my pelvis? Like at what point do I lose the individualism to choose to not treat myself, to not take care of myself? Because if you're in a position of responsibility of taking care of other people, it becomes clear and obvious when you're no longer in a position or you're no longer capable of taking care of other people, of being responsible for other people. So at what point do you become no longer responsible for caring for yourself? And see, the answer in the pre-modern world, up until about the 80s, was there were answers, and I'm not talking about the answers. I'm not talking about the answer to the question, as in the abstract answer at what point. I'm talking about when they came to the conclusion, because there was a point that you could come to that conclusion, and the result of coming to the conclusion, so not the answer, but the result of answering the question of coming to the conclusion that this person is no longer able to care for themselves was called an insane asylum. You were just deemed insane, unfit to care for yourself, and you were put in a home where people would care for you. And here's the thing that we don't understand. And Moll Flanders really brought this home, because Moll is, her name is Betty. And I learned through her, when she's a young girl, her real name, the name that I guess you would say her legal, what do they say, the government name? Isn't that what the cool urban people say? They say my government name. Why you call me by my government name, right? That. Her government name was Betty, and it's actually interesting to call it her government name because she was born in prison. Her like Bane, actually. You think you know the darkness. Moll Flanders was born in it. And you think that prison was bad, Bane. That prison was in the modern era. That prison was definitely not Northgate. Isn't it called Northgate Prison? Anyway, she says it so many times, and the narrator, the reader of the book, says it with so much horror and loathing that I have pushed it out of my memory for fear of embodying or internalizing. Internalizing is a word that I've been hearing people say a lot. I've been listening to people who live in California talk a lot. And internalizing, I internalized, meaning to absorb and then change your behavior to reflect the thing. Anyway, she was born a Betty, and that's what they called them. That's what they called girls that were born in prison. They were called little Bettys. Little Elizabeths. I wonder why. Betty. And I don't remember what I was thinking. Give me a second. She was born a Betty, and she falls in love. And because of the anxiety of being around the guy that she's in love and people knowing that she's in love with him, she just goes into hiding. She just withdraws within herself and stays inside her bedroom, etc. And the doctor, they take her to a doctor, and they're like, man, you must be sick if you're hiding in the bedroom all the day, you won't come out, you won't eat, etc., etc., etc. And the doctor's like, well, she's just in love with someone, give her time to get over it, and don't make fun of her for being in love, and she'll just go back to being normal eventually. It'll pass. Well, it never passes, but the melancholy that that made her bedridden eventually passed, because eventually she was forced to confront, her romantic partner. And anyway, they knew to just give her time, is my point. When you were sad back in the day, back before the 80s, you were just given time to be alone and be sad. And if you're being sad stretched on to the point that you were no longer taking care of yourself. And so when we're talking about the pre-modern world, we're talking about like when it got to the point that's like a parent or a sibling or a hired help in the house had to spend extra time to take care of you, so you were costing the family extra resources to take care of you because you weren't taking care of yourself. They sent you away, right? They were like, okay, well, if you won't take care of yourself, we don't have the energy to dote on you because you're being a narcissist and you're trying to stop the world to make everyone pay attention to you to make you feel better. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you to this place where there are professionals who will do that. And if you got better, they let you out. And if you didn't get better, they didn't let you out. And that's why the guy who invented the lobotomy thought he was doing a mercy to these people that were unfit and incapable of managing their own emotions and their own lives, of dressing themselves, of eating, of communicating with the people around them in an effective way, right? These people that weren't able to do that, they thought that by scrambling their brains but leaving them alive, they were doing them a mercy. They literally thought that they were taking away their suffering, because they were. They were. If my definition of anxiety, that anxiety is the knowledge that you're too stupid to have survived as long as you have, and the realization that you're definitely too stupid to continue living much longer, if you can't reconcile that with the fact that you have and you will, you become a drain on resources, and the cost to institutionalize you is the same cost. It might even be cheaper to just send you away to professionals who can do it better. And honestly, over the aggregate, if we as human beings like the company of one another, if we prefer the society of one another, okay? And that Kennedy daughter who was lobotomized, if they loved her, we can't know, but if they loved her, if they genuinely loved her, and they genuinely loved her society, and they liked her being around, but they didn't like her being a stone cold bitch all the time, what's better? What's better? The eventual self-end that comes for people like her? The constant escalation of self-gratifying and self-attentive behavior? Or the lobotomy? I know a lot of people who would benefit from lobotomies. You don't need alcohol, and you don't need prescription painkillers to dissociate from reality. You don't need to have a job. You don't need to worry about being hit on at the gym. You won't go to the gym. You won't need to worry about going anywhere. You will have no anxiety. You will have no thoughts. And this is what people want. This is what alcoholism is. This is what the quest for oblivion is. And I guess when I began and I was talking about how, people only identify things in dualism, and that I obviously look like, because I'm a stoner, I have to be a loser. It's like, well, I don't get stoned to obliviate. I don't try to turn off my brain. In fact, in a lot of ways, I don't notice a cognitive effect anymore, because I've gotten so good at competing with the intoxicant to continue to function cognitively at a higher level. if possible. Now, obviously, I don't, because that's impossible. The only reason it feels like it's at a higher level is because when I'm sober anymore, I'm going through withdrawals. But I've read my prose when I was sober, and it's not better. I'm significantly better now. I don't know. I'm at an hour and 45. This is when I usually tell you that I'm feeling anxious to wrap up and like I need to be coming to a conclusion. The mental health gurus and the pop psychology dickheads tell us, the mentally ill, the desperate, the hurting, the suffering, that we need to share. We need to tell the people around us how we feel. And what they don't understand, being professionals who need people to communicate how they feel and need people to have a negative space in their life that can be occupied by somebody that they will pay, or that somebody who will listen, but they also need a desperation, they being the psychologist, the professional, the medical professional, the psychological professional, or the mental health professional, needs there to also be a desperation for someone to fill the void of someone to talk to, because desperation, you'll pay for things you're desperate for, right? So like if you're despairing of the touch of a woman, right, because the touch of a woman means so much more to men than women truly understand, just to our mental health. Just being touched by a woman does so much to heal that anxiety that every man has. That's why prostitution exists, and that's why it was something that you didn't have to pay for a long time. It was just a mental health thing. You go to the temple, and a woman will touch you in that way, in the guise of the goddess, because the goddess, the temple, the women at that time understood that if men don't have that touch, they'll kill each other. Or, what's worse and more dangerous to the society, themselves. And so I came to a confrontation. I don't know if that's the right word, but I came to a confrontation with myself last night. We're not supposed to use that S word, but I had a confrontation within myself last night that, not that I am at risk again or that I'm pondering, but rather that it's a theme that continues to show up as I'm thinking about my own narrative work. And I wonder if my reticence to explore it, or my horror at finding it present in my own work at all, is, I find myself wondering if it's not my own way of exploring the idea as a fantasy. And the reason that I wonder isn't like a general curiosity or like a passing, I wonder if that's the case, so that I'll have an answer if someone asks me, but it's more, it's a horror, because I know that fantasization is the first step toward desensitization. So when we're talking about narcissistic psychopaths and their psychosexual drama, the first step to acting on their impulses, what they find themselves wanting to fill that negative void, that negative space of communication in their lives with, they have to work themselves up to it in fantasization first. And so I find myself wondering if the impulse to write about this, and if the direction that it looks like it's leading to me, or that it has already gone, that the ending isn't a fantasization on my part isn't an attempt to desensitize so that I can choose to leave before the pain is too bad, or and if I'm able to convince myself that no, sometimes things just happen, and some things just need to be included in holistic stories, because you can't shy away from ugly and painful things, especially if you say that cruelty is beauty, and what you want to do is write a beautiful story or tell. I'm not writing anything. I'm not creating. This is a non-fiction work. It's a narrative, and I'm trying to narrate it. I'm not narrating it either. I'm trying to produce it. I'm a producer. I'm trying to organize it in such a way that it's consumable and entertaining, and that you can easily interpret it, and then come back and realize that there are hidden depths there. And so I wonder if doing that, if I'm not encouraging people to fantasize and desensitize. But see, I know I'm not. I know I'm not, because I know that I'm not a liberal. I'm not a liberal eugenic genocidal fuckhead. So I don't believe that the world is overpopulated, and I don't believe that the best way to achieve the kingdom in this life is to convince the people who aren't me to get rid of themselves from the competition. I don't believe that. In fact, I abhor that impulse within the liberal community. I abhor that impulse within the Christian community. And it's interesting what I found myself thinking about instead of answering the questions that I asked, because I was abhorred by the thought that I might be so evil. I am not evil. What I found myself thinking about is, it's obviously the choosing to take one's own end is abhorrent to us, and it's obviously been abhorrent to us forever because of the burial convention of the Christians. They didn't invent that. And if they did invent it, it speaks to a compassion, because it means that things had been so bad for so long in the areas where they needed to taboo choosing one's own exit, that might have been the normal way to go. It might have been the normal way to go for parts of post-Roman Europe. It might have been extremely common. Medieval Europe was a very difficult place to survive. It might have been very common. And that's a wound, if I'm going to bring this holistically back around to my own pain. That's doing a wound to the world. It's malicious non-compliance with life, with the basic tenet of biology. I already said that. That's what taking one's own end. That's what choosing one's own exit from the stage of the world. If the world is a stage and we're all players, choosing one's own exit is a malicious non-compliance with the game or the play acting of life. And so if biology is a pretense, if civilization is a pretense, if life is a pretense, if it's play acting, if all of it is fake, and if it's all pretending, then choosing to remove yourself from the game is a malicious non-compliance. It's a nuclear bomb. It's a shiv in the night, right? It's a wound, not a mortal wound. So I shouldn't be using such violent terminology. What happens is when you choose to cut your own thread instead of allowing the Norns to do it, instead of allowing the Fates to do it. I think it was the Fates. I think that's what they're called in Greek. The Norns are are closer to my memory because of, if you've been following this all the way through, of the recency of having studied Norse mythology, the Norns are closer to my mind. But if you're not familiar with my work, if this is your first time, because I really need to remember that even though these are sequential, I'm no longer numbering them, and most people click on the most recent thing anyway. I need to get better at doing that thing, in fact, watching the most recent thing and worrying less about the earliest work. What was I saying? Damn it, Vincent, damn it. Why do you do this? If you make the choice to be the one to cut your thread, sure, you're proving free will, but the action is like a bomb. It is like a bomb. But the injuries that are done by it are caused, or the result of, the shrapnel of the explosion, less than the actual shockwave itself. So in fantasy literature, I'm thinking about Conan, and because I'm thinking about Conan, the most recent piece of literature or piece of representation that's used the Conan magic that I can think of, and it isn't the Conan video game, in fact, but is Divinity 2 Original Sin. The tutorial bit, the prologue, the first chapter, the island that you're on, that prison island, is just Conan how do I want to say this? Like Conan the footnotes. Like they took the magic of the Conan universe and then they just expressed it in their own. And in that universe, if you've watched The Witcher on Netflix, you've also seen some Conan magic. Blood magic and ritual sacrifice are very, very powerful. So I'm thinking now, instead of thinking about Divinity, Divinity 2 has me thinking about the people that are crucified and able to do super powerful magic. But now I'm thinking about that scene, and I think it might have been the second season. I don't remember. I watched all of The Witcher at once, so I don't remember if there were 2 or 3 or only 1 seasons. But anyway, the battle with the wizards, the lady magi, I don't remember what they're called, but where the spell that they use kills them, that sacrifice, but it's super powerful. When you cut your own thread, it's like that. It's a magical explosion. And there is shrapnel that rips through the universe. And some of that shrapnel is abstracted to a metaphorical level that makes sense, in that people are injured, they're wounded by your exit, people who knew you. But it also sends, in the explosion metaphor, it also tears through the weave of fate, is how I refer to it. But if there is an order and there is an organization to the universe, right? And if everything is building on top of what's happening rather than reacting to what immediately happened before it, do you understand? And so if there is a conceptual author that is conceptually God, and these are not the religious terms, so just stick with me, because I'm talking about, I'm being esoteric. I'm no longer talking about Abrahamic, an Abrahamic interpretation or even worldview. If there is an author, and by that I mean there is a consciousness capable of observing and recording everything that has happened in the universe, that means that there is a forward-moving momentum to the story of the universe. And when you're telling stories as an author, no matter at what level of conception we're talking about, so whether we're talking about the fan fictions that I used to write when I was in first grade about Die Hard, and about about Aladdin and about Greek mythology. I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I know that this is off topic, but I've been thinking a lot lately about how when I was a little boy, first or second grade, I wrote a fan fiction that combined Aladdin with his magic carpet and the Clash of the Titans. And I don't know how I did that because I'd never seen the Clash of the Titans. So I wonder where my influences came from, because there were a lot of thinking back on what happened in that, and I can't really remember. All I can really remember is I can't really remember it, but the what I do remember is pre-verbal. They're images and they're Greek inspired, and I had no access to Greek mythology or Greek imagery in the home. All of our imagery was European, and by European I mean medieval, Western European. If we had historical iconography, I mean. That's very interesting, and I've really lost the thread of what I was talking about. Okay, so I was doing a conceptual proof of something like a god. If there's someone who knows the story, right? If there's someone who's able to know the story all the way back, know every detail, that means that there's someone who understands the forward movement of the story, and someone who has, if not a plan, a plot for what's moving forward, right? And so we know this intuitively. And I have about 15 minutes, and I might let this one run long now that I've pushed past the crying. So this one might run 45 minutes long. But we know intuitively that there's a plot, because there couldn't be conspiracy theory literature if there weren't a plot. And there couldn't be narrative fiction if there weren't a plot. Because, in fact, art does imitate life, not the other way around. This insistence lately on the ironic life imitating art isn't true, and we really need to stop letting people get away with saying it. Because letting people get away with saying it is letting people get away with it being true. Because saying it is, in fact, art imitating life. Saying that life imitates art, in order to say that, is a work of art. That's artifice, because you're taking artistic license by referencing a truism, by referencing a cultural artifact, which is what I was talking about when I was talking about our level of cultural discourse. So when you quote an idiom like art imitates life, and then you say it ironically, life imitates art, what you're doing is you're using artistic license. So what you're actually doing is being poetic. So when you do that, when you say that, that's an artistic statement, right? Which is, in fact, by flipping it upside down, is in fact using an artistic statement and is in fact art representing life. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to say that people copy what they see. They monkey see, monkey do what they see in movies and television and books, etc., right? But by saying it artistically, you're just making it true. You're just saying it syntactically true. But what is in fact true is that art imitates life. By artistically representing what people do, you're imitating them artistically. So we really have to stop that. But so what do I mean when I say art imitates life? Why was I talking about that? So no narrative fiction without a plot, right? Everything. Okay, so I think I talked a little bit. I know I talked a little bit in the first episode about druids, and I talked a little bit in a later episode about getting into arguments with religious scholars about the difference in the oral and the written traditions. That scholars are somehow confused about the differences between the oral and the written traditions, and we're not going to talk about that. That's a whole other bailiwick. Okay, I'm trying to be quick. No narrative without a plot. The Druids. Why did I bring up the Druids and I say no narrative without the plot? Well, the Druids, what people fail to understand about the oral tradition is that the people who were responsible for the oral tradition were responsible for the oral tradition. You understand? They weren't responsible for the the people taking in they weren't responsible for the people. They were responsible for the tradition remaining the same. So what they were responsible for doing was making sure that as new artists were telling new stories, the plot remained the same. The plot had to remain the same because it was all about theme. The plot stays the same, but the themes change because theme is what you are interpreting. Theme is where you begin. If you understand the theme of the story, I don't know what that word means. Theme. The more I say it, the more it becomes meaningless. And I do that. I've done that a lot to myself. I'll look into that some other day. When you understand the theme of a work, you can begin to understand what is being said at different levels of abstraction. And so I guess when I'm talking about self-ending and appearing in my work and worrying about how that will be interpreted and what it means, it's wondering, like, is the self-end itself a theme? So is it recurring? Is it something that I want my audience grappling with? Is it something I am grappling with and therefore it needs to be in the work, right? You know, like how much sex and violence belong in representative literature? So in representative art, how much sex and violence actually belong? And the question begins to be answered when you start to look at whether art is imitating life accurately. So how much sex and violence are happening in the world, right? And so when you watch daytime television and you watch this representative media, I should stop saying literature and I should start saying media, but I hate that word, media. I fucking hate it so much. I hate the word media like I hate the word content. I hate fucking I hate the idea of producing content, and I fucking hate the idea of media. For largely the same reasons. Media is a word that conservatives and liberals alike twist to mean whatever they want, with no context, and content dehumanizes art. I say this a lot in other platforms, but we've lost the plot. What I'm trying to say is, if there's an author, it knows the plot. It knows what's happening, right? And so when I say that the definition of the truest and most accurate and the only workable definition of God is one that understands that God is the space between. It's the unknown. It's the unknown unknown. It's whatever is just outside of your conceptual understanding at any moment. That's the only thing that God ever is. And so if if there's a consciousness that's outside of the conceptual, outside of our conceptual ability to perceive it, that means that it is able to perceive us and reality in such a way that it is able to perceive everything, right? And so if there's something that can perceive everything, it is aware of the plot, okay? And so if God, the author, and initial caps, right? And so we're not talking about God, the father of Abrahamic faith. We're talking about God, the watching watcher, or the sleeping dreamer, the creator or creatrix, or the creation, the intellection which created the universe. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about Christianity. We're not talking about superficial religion. We're talking about truth. And okay? So if there is a that thing, it is aware of the plot. The question, if you're going to introduce Christianity and you're going to ask, well, where does Christianity fit into this, and does Christianity have a falsifiable hypothesis? Well, their falsifiable hypothesis is that God, the author, is also able to make creative choices. Okay? And so if we're talking about if we're and so creative choices are creative choices as a category of things that that the author can do imply a circumstantial how would I say this? What is it called when a king takes your land? Seizure? Like a god damn. Now I've got temperamental, but that's not what I mean. I mean here we go. I got it. They imply a circumstantial seizure of free will. Okay? So if God the author is capable of will in itself, if it has a will and it's capable of willing, and by that and it's able to express that will and creative choices in the plot or the narrative of time as it plays out, and even like specifically just the narrative of this planet as it plays out, right? If there's an author capable of doing that, then the assumption is that the author knows the plot, okay? And the implication of that then is to ask, like, I don't know how exactly the logical fallacy begging the question works, because it seems to be the kind of thing that every time you accuse somebody of it, the person that you've accused tells you that you don't understand how the fallacy actually works. And anyway, logical fallacies are just what people pretending to be smart use to sound smart. But the question that's begged by the introduction of, or the examination of, an author at the level of initial caps is well, I don't know how to phrase it because it's pre-verbal. It's obvious to me. It's whether that author is communicating with anybody at the level of our perspective, our perception. And so this is where Christianity answers the question and says, yes, that was the Ancient of Days, Jesus, and now the Pope. That's who serves that role. That's the person who communicates directly with the author and gets the message of how the plot is going to play out moving forward. And, you know, the Jews, you know, they had the prophets and they had the judges, and then depending on which sect or which interpretation of Judaism you ask, they have different answers for whether or not, you know, God still communicates with us. Their God still communicates with them. And then, you know, the Muslims had Muhammad, who definitively declared that there was no one who communicated directly with God after him, would be no one after him. And so that's how you get conservative, and you have to rely on the text, and that's how you become a literalist of the text. And that's, you know, that goes back to the American conservative impulse to deify or to make the Constitution of the United States itself sacred, so that it can't be changed, and it most definitely can't be rewritten. Right? In the way that I said that when you write a document, you write it once, you write it twice, you write it thrice, and then you edit. And so because our document was edited at the first draft level, we don't have a perfectly written document. What we have is a document that reacts to what's happening moment to moment, and then we call back for precedent with the document, but we have to then rely on interpretations of how the document has been used through history. And that's how you get bad legislation, and that's how you get bad interpretations, and that's how you get Roe v. Wade, and that's how it gets overturned for political and That's how it can be overturned by lobbying a conservative judge with vacation homes, right? Or maybe Clarence Thomas isn't conservative, but that doesn't change my opinion of the decision. Making a good decision for a bad reason is still a good decision. The reasons remain bad, but making a good decision for bad reasons remains a good decision. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about cruelty being beautiful, right? Doing the most difficult thing, especially if it's the right thing, if it's righteous, is manly. It is beautiful. And I don't mean masculine. I mean it's human. The word man means human. To be manly means to be human-like. Not to be masculine. It means to be manly. Humanish. And there's nothing wrong with being human. And I think that's what the pop psychology crowd don't understand. When they tell you that it's okay to not be okay, well, to not be okay is to not be human. And so what they're saying is that it's okay to not be human. And so when they're telling you that it's okay to be dehumanized, they're telling you that they are the void in your life that will dehumanize you in the way that you most want. That will tell you that you have lost your humanity to an addiction, or that you've lost your humanity to a trauma, or that you've sacrificed your humanity to despair. And then they'll teach you to continue. They'll teach you to replace that thing with them. And the way that they're able to do it is by encouraging you to tell the people around you how you feel. Because the people around you don't want to hear about how you feel. They don't care. And what they'll do is the more you try to reach out to them, the more they'll push you away, creating a bigger and bigger and bigger void until you find yourself calling better help and being bullied into being better by them. And that's 2 hours and 16 minutes. And when I listen back to this, I'll see so many places that I left off. But the one that's most important, and the one that I want to get to the most, is that if you choose that act of free will, and there are a lot of people that have chosen it and will tell you that you don't always get to make that choice. Sometimes you're not allowed to make that choice. Sometimes that circumstantial seizure of your free will is made known in what can only be called miraculous terms. And you don't have to be religious to understand why an author would do that. Because you're doing this. So if you're watching this, you're engaged with other media. You're not watching this or listening to this, as the case may be, because you want to learn about media. Do you understand? So you've read a book before. You've watched a movie before. You've engaged with story before. And so because you've engaged with other media before, you're aware of the signature. You're aware that artists, that an artist has a signature. And whether that's the things that I've referenced in other media, like the way that podcasters or YouTubers or whatever sign on or sign off, or their catchphrase or whatever. Catchphrases are exactly what I'm talking about. Authors, writers, people whose faces and whose people behind the scenes, let's say, they have a signature. We're aware of painters signing their work, but we're also familiar, because of true crime, with serial killers signing their work, leaving a signature. Your signature is in a way the thing that's characteristic to you. And I think that we're all chasing a signature. We're all chasing the thing that's authentic to us and everything that we do. For example, like a really ugly but easy example is Quentin Tarantino and the foot stuff, right? You know you're watching a Quentin Tarantino movie, whether you know it's a Quentin Tarantino movie or not, when feet show up in it at random and don't need to be there, right? This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a signature. And so when I'm talking about miracle, and when I'm talking about the Norns not cutting your thread when it really seems like that absolutely should have happened, the impulse is to say, well, what's the reason, right? The near-death experience has been almost elevated to a religious experience. I mean, it is a sublime experience, but it's been almost elevated. It's been elevated significantly higher than it should be on the hierarchy or the pyramid or the totem pole, to get back to my very first metaphor, of important experiences, because it's evidence of a signature, right? It's evidence of an author, and it's these things, these miracles. The reason they were used in the ancient world as proofs that whichever god was more powerful than whatever other god wasn't just basal superstition. It was the only proof that they had, and we want proof. Even pre-scientific humans, we want proof of efficacy, and that's why there's civilizational turnover. It was when the Roman government and the Roman religion stopped having efficacy, stopped working, the people stopped participating in it, and it stopped being a thing, right? Does that close everything that I wanted to say? Everything except for the self-end being a bomb. It's malicious non-compliance of the author. It's saying that you're not a character in anyone's work, and that you refuse to play along with the script. It's Jessica Alba saying that she doesn't read scripts, and then being confused and angry in public that she's not getting calls to work anymore. That's what the self-end is. It's a middle finger. And sometimes I think the author agrees that thematically there's a lesson to be taught by the wounds that the people who are left behind will be forced to sustain. That the hole in the fabric and the shrapnel as a result are the story. And sometimes I think that injuries and pain and hurt are just that. I think sometimes they're a reminder that we're alive, in the same way that this is why cutters cut, is to remind themselves that this body isn't just a prison. It is a living thing, and we are responsible for keeping it alive. But is there a mercy? Right? Is there a forgiveness in agreeing with someone that they're not fit to manage their own lives? Because we used to do that. That's what human sacrifice was for. And that's what the liberal worldview is it's a tacit declaration that non-liberal people are not capable of living their lives, and that the people below the level of the decision makers among the liberals aren't capable of making their own decisions. And so the liberal worldview isn't like, it is an attempt to play God. And it's an attempt to play God by committee. It's an attempt to recreate the ancient pantheons of families like the Olympians. To say, well, ancient family systems once ruled the world, and they were once the whole world, not conceptual pieces of it. They were once able to rule and make decisions for the whole world, and they did just fine. Why can't we be the gods of the coming generations? And that is life imitating art with no plot. It's repeating the plot elements. It's repeating the events, because this whole thing where the liberals are trying to make sure that Trump can't run for the election in a year by putting him in prison is exactly what happened during the Wars of the Roses. One of the parties just tried to keep the other party that was trying to become king, they just tried to keep him in prison the whole time. Like, our politics are exactly the same. And so that indicates, what I'm saying is that indicates an author, and that doesn't indicate a heavenly author with an uppercase initial caps A author. It suggests a mortal author who thinks that they're smart enough to be and play God with this living generation. And what we're going to find, and I keep saying this, but I have noticed in my own work that the 50s of every civilization, of every century rather, the 50s of every century is either a collapse or a new addition onto the civilization and the civilizational tower. So that by the 50s of every century, the civilization either collapses under its own weight or adds another story, adds another level of hierarchical conception. And so we're coming up to that, and it's obvious. I'm not even being prophetic. I'm not even being clever. At 2 years away from the quarter century mark, we are arguing about AI. We're arguing about the importance of writers to the creative project, and we're talking about the efficacy of our governors as such, as our governors run around in circles to do political theater. And so I guess what I'm coming around to and what I'm ending is, in my despair, I decided that exile was the way to go. I decided that Timothy Leary was right when he said to tune in, turn on, and drop out. But that's malicious noncompliance with civilization. That is the liberal saying that he's better than everyone else and he can survive on his own. Well, you and I both know that I can't survive on my own, because I couldn't care for my cats. I couldn't. I had to find a symbiotic benefactor, someone that I could provide for, and that I could help, and that I could be for, be a man for, and somebody who could support and encourage my work. I couldn't do this without it, because I couldn't balance the work. I couldn't do working at the gas station. I couldn't handle the customers. I couldn't handle being a leader and come home and try to work on my art. I couldn't handle it. And that swings me back around to my emotions, so this has come full circle. This is 2.5 hours. I feel like I should feel guilty, but I also feel like I should feel proud. It takes me a little while, I guess, to get going, but if the pursuit is authenticity, I don't think it gets any more authentic than crying just because I'm sad on camera or mic. I don't think that I could do putting my face on camera. Not that I don't want you to look at my face. I don't like my face particularly, but I don't know that I could. I literally don't know that I could record it. So, this is what we get for now. Thank you for watching. It's been talking to you. This has been Talking to Myself Gaming. I am talking to myself, and I'll be talking to myself on this very spot probably tomorrow. Yeah, you'll hear from me then. Till next time.